Okay, you can admit it. It's just us. No one else is listening. Have you thought of quitting? Quitting writing your book, quitting your writing career altogether, quitting that marketing campaign that feels like it's not really going anywhere and that's just so icky? Have you thought about quitting that? Many of us have. Many of my clients as a writing coach have come to me because they're like, yeah, I'm scrapping this book idea and, I'm going to start over. And sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's not. Even though I'm a writing coach, I'm not hell-bent on forcing people to be authors. Not everyone's cut out for this stuff. It is not the easy way out. It is not a great way to make money unless you're one of the exceptions, which I definitely tried to teach you to become. But it's not the most direct route. You could be making tons of money. You could be expressing yourself creatively in other ways, not just being a writer. So sometimes maybe you realize that being a writer is not everything that you thought it would be, and you've got a bunch of valid reasons for scrapping the whole thing. And then you start anew and you're refreshed and you have this whole other career or hobby in front of you, and it's really, really great. But sometimes it's a huge mistake. I have a client who's become a really good friend who constantly is scrapping her book, or so she says, and she's returning to the drawing board. She's got a whole new idea. She's so invigorated. She's so fired up. This is going to be it. But the funny thing is, this is the same book she's been writing for the past 10 years. It really is. She's not actually scrapping her book and starting anew. She's still writing the same book, but she's fooling herself. Sometimes the idea of quitting and starting fresh is just so compelling that we lie to ourselves and we say that we're doing it. So in this episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, I'm going to be talking about quitting. Okay, should you quit your book? Should you quit writing altogether? Should you scrap that marketing or promotion or the way that you're trying to build your author platform? Should you? Really? Why? What are the reasons that you actually should do this? And then once you do that, what are you going to kind of fill in that space with? Because if you're scrapping writing so that you can watch more television, that's not going to be my favorite outcome for you. As a creative and writing coach, I really believe that all humans have this innate need for creativity. And those of us who are not giving ourselves the time, the space, the energy to be creative in some way, we're really missing out. And this is the sort of thing that when you're in the trenches, you probably don't realize that you're doing this to yourself. But when you come towards the end of your life, that's when the regrets start flowing in. And never finishing that book might be one of your regrets. So let's talk today about what are the valid reasons for scrapping a book? What are the ones that are totally not valid? What are the ways in which you actually start fresh if you have scrapped something, or what the ways that you can find something new to do? And also, what do you do when you scrap your marketing campaign? And what are the reasons behind that? Because believe me, I've been going through something with promoting my books under one of my pseudonyms. And man, sometimes those marketing efforts, it feels like it is such a slog. You're trying to do everything. I'm doing everything right, but I'm so deep in the trenches that I'm not seeing what else I could be doing. So one other thing we're going to be doing this episode is I'm going to be talking about the things that many authors kind of hit their head against the wall with. The old ways of marketing your book that people still think are so crucial, but they're not. And then some of the other ways that are actually moving the needle. And also at some point, we just need to be realistic. Sometimes there's a disconnect between reality and expectation. And that doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that it's going to take longer to get to your goal, or that maybe your goal should be slightly readjusted. But that doesn't mean that you're giving up. That just means that you're re-examining. So instead of scrapping, maybe we want to, renew without quitting. But maybe you do want to quit. I don't know. After listening to this podcast episode, I think you're going to have gained some clarity at the very least. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena Akhavein, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Welcome to the How to Be an Author podcast. I'm writing coach Karena Akhavein, and it is really my purpose in life, I've discovered, to help other writers to see their writing goals come to fruition. I like to make your writing dreams come true. I like to help you to push further than you thought you might. I like to have you achieving the things that you said you would achieve and you couldn't figure out how to do it yourself. Well, that's what I'm here for. And I've developed some proprietary teaching and masterclasses and even a workbook that really help you to do this with or without live coaching sessions from me, your writing coach, Karena Akhavein. So let's start with this episode about quitting, which I promise is going to be uplifting. It's not going to be depressing, but let's talk about some of the reasons that my clients have given me for why they wanted to scrap the book they were writing. We're not going to talk about quitting the writing career altogether right now. Let's start with the book, because often that's actually the first step. First, people want to scrap the book and then they're like, that's it. I'm going to scrap the whole writing career. That's not awesome. But let's talk about some of the things I've heard. So the first thing I hear are people will tell me they've lost the passion for the current project. Like they can't find motivation because they're not excited about it. And to this I say, and this is of course normal, you start off, you're super excited. It's like a relationship, and then you lose the passion. It is possible to find passion for that same old book project. You can find things to be excited about. In my workbooks, I have so many ways of falling back in love with your project, but definitely loss of passion is something that is a symptom of something, right? There's something wrong. So I would never tell you to ignore that. I would never say to a writer who's like, I've lost my passion for my book, I'd never say, just push through it. Absolutely not. I want you to find ways to be excited by what you're writing. Now, whether that's a new idea or the same idea, that depends on the writer. But I think that sometimes you quit things too early on before you've actually given it a chance, and you are too easily dropping what could be a great book relationship just because you don't have the butterflies anymore. So think about all of that. Another reason that people tend to want to scrap a book is they're like, oh, I've got this major plot issue, or I've got a character issue that it's not working. My characters, I don't love them. I think that starting fresh is really going to be the way to go. And to this I say, there are actually ways of tweaking your plot or your characters quite significantly, but quite easily. So you don't need to scrap the whole thing if you have some really great elements in there. There are so many ways of fixing your plot with just sometimes all it takes are a few sentences or moving things around. And this is half of the reason why I often encourage people to work off of an outline and to recreate an outline, because it helps you to see these issues before you're too deep into the writing. Everybody who says that they're writing by the seat of their pants and everything, they hit this issue at some point where they're like, wait, my plot's a little convoluted. Well, of course it is, because you didn't plan it out. So for as many people who say, yeah, I wait for the creativity to hit me and I just like to see where it leads me, that's fun to a degree. But if you want a plot that works, it does take some planning. It does take a little science. It's not just art. Plots are based on these human archetypes for storytelling. And if you don't have some of the key components, it's not going to work. So that is so easy to fix that it's a shame to quit the whole story because of this. And you want to know something else. If you're hitting these plot and character issues in this manuscript, guess what's going to happen with your next one? The same thing. Because if you don't know how to write a character or a plot that's compelling, you're not going to know how to write it in the next book. It's not going to miraculously happen. Oftentimes when we're learning, it's because we've been fixing things that we've done wrong. That's how you learn, by actually doing. So in my courses, I'm always showing people, how do you build a great character? How do you build a great plot? And also in my self-editing checklists, I tell you literally what to look for that's not working, but also how to fix it. So all these things are super important to consider, because oftentimes the things that you're complaining about in this novel, they're only going to carry over if you've not been learning. Another reason people are trying to, change their book project and completely scrap it, start over, is they've been talking to too many people, or they've been reading too many things. Now, I think it's great to have beta readers. I think it's great to look at what market trends are. I think it's great to see what people are liking to read. However, If you are just trying to shift all the time because of things that, your middle school teacher said, or because of things that you read in an article that the market's now doing this, by the time you finish your book, that market might have shifted again. So you're better off actually writing something that you care about and that actually corresponds to what kind of a storyteller you are, and something that you're going to be able to deliver to your readers in a way that's, super honest and super, aligned with who you are. That might be a better way to go. So many authors are doubting themselves and they're jumping. Oh, I heard that, romance is selling more copies now. I heard that fantasy is really big. Maybe I should be writing these things. Well, I don't know. Do you love them? Why'd you start writing this other book? Clearly the story was inside of you. So is it really something that you need to drop? Or also, okay, what if you adapt your story to market trends? You can do that as well. Or what if you tweak your story so that it doesn't have these problematic elements that maybe your friends, talked about, but also, are your friends your perfect reader? Because if they're not, you don't need to listen to what they have to say. Another reason that writers often tell me that they are thinking of, quitting, their book or quitting the whole thing is they're like, I've really evolved, as a writer, and this project no longer aligns with my creative goals or my personal goals. It doesn't feel like who I am. This might be to me one of the most sincere reasons for scrapping something, but at the same time, is there a way to transform something into something that is something that aligns with who you are as a writer? That's definitely something to think about. But then conversely, I'll see some writers going, I started this as an experiment. I never write this genre, but I started working on it just to see what would happen. And it's, I don't know how to fix it. And they keep hitting their head against the wall. And in that case, I sometimes tell them, consider this a failed experiment. Consider this a learning experience. Consider this something as, you tried it, it didn't work out, you're fine with it, you're going to go to something that you're more aligned with at this point. Because if this failed experiment helped you to learn what your sincere, authentic author voice is, I count that as a win. So that's really major. Other writers have come to me and they're like, I think I'm gonna have to scrap this book because, I have like these life changes. I have a new job. I have these new responsibilities. My mom is sick. I think I'm just gonna kind of quit right now. And that's fair. Our life does take these, turns that we didn't know about. And we have different priorities. We have different circumstances, but realistically, you're not running a race. You can absolutely write your book on your own schedule. You don't need to be meeting the original time goals that you had. So if you were like, I'm going to finish this book in 6 months, and you're probably thinking, wow, writing coach, you're not being, you're being a little disingenuous because you have a course called From Idea to Published in 6 months. But I tell you in the course that this is kind of a possible situation that you could do. I make it possible for you to do that. I make it easier and more streamlined for you to do that. But I always tell you, you can take as long as you need. Now, no making excuses and saying that you need more time and that you're filling that time with things that don't matter. But you don't need to quit your book project. You can reevaluate your goals when it comes to the time, or maybe your book should become a short story. But keep doing it. If it means a lot to you, keep doing it. Because so many times writers are going to take kind of a temporary reason and make it a permanent stop. So many times authors are going to come to me and they've got writer's block and they're like, I'm burned out. I think I need to quit because I really need to, this is not working for me and this is not good for my psyche and my mindset and everything else. And listen, I'm really serious about how burnout affects writers. I have actually had writing coaching clients where I told them repeatedly, I was like, you need to slow down, stop putting so much pressure on yourself, stop trying to push through, you need to rewind, reevaluate what's going on. And they didn't do that because, I'm a writing coach, but people can take my advice or not. And I've had these writers actually hit real burnout. And that's the saddest thing to me because these are the most passionate, talented people. And I see them now abandoning an entire dream because they pushed through or because they saw this temporary thing as a permanent situation. So if you're facing something like writer's block or frustration or mental health issues, take a break. Try out different approaches. Don't scrap everything altogether. And remember, your book is still going to be there when you get back. So it doesn't matter if you leave it aside. This is not a partner who's going to be mad at you because you ignored them. Your book is an inanimate thing. I know it doesn't always feel that way, but it'll still be there. So I don't want you to scrap it like as this, end all be all or black and white. That is not super valid. Give it a break, but don't say you quit. Because really, when we say we've quit, that I think is really significant. We're telling ourselves that story. I think it really operates on your whole mindset and on your brain. Your brain starts to be like, okay, cool. How are we going to how are we going to fill this time? How are we going to find other things to do? And then before you know it, there's not really any space for writing, and you have to carve out that whole space again if you want to go back to it. And sometimes that just seems like a huge task, so you don't do it. Another issue that I've seen writers quit over is that they're like, oh, I'm comparing myself to others. And this happened in my writing group. I had some people who were so, prolific. They were writing all the time, and other people who had full-time jobs who were joining us every other week, maybe. And they start comparing themselves to the people who have the luxury of being able to work constantly, or to the people who just spew out words, or who are, these absolute show people who are able to read their text in a way that makes it come to life. And then these other people would come to me and they'd say, I'm comparing myself to so-and-so. And, this really makes me see that I absolutely, really probably shouldn't be an author. And that's where I would have to tell them, focus on your own creative journey. Those external benchmarks, they're not really real. Different people prioritize different things. Different readers prioritize different things. So there's room for everyone. There's room for all different ways of working. So, comparing yourself to others and thinking that, you're coming up short and you should just absolutely drop everything, I think that's a really sad reason for quitting and probably not a great one. Some people are like, I need to quit because, this writing success thing hasn't happened for me. And I'm like, okay, how long have you been writing? Oh, a year. That's all you've taken? Yes, that's what I said at the beginning of this podcast. Writing is not the fastest way to encounter success. Writing is not the fastest way to make money. In fact, you might never make a lot of money with it. But this impatience for success, all of these overnight successes you see, most of them have been working behind the scenes for such a long time. Then there was a trigger for their success that happened, and it was able to happen because they were at the right time, at the right place, putting out content, reaching readers, and they ended up finally making the thing that made a difference, right? I had an episode of the podcast about this. You should go check that out. It's about making your own luck as a writer, the odds for success, et cetera, et cetera. This impatience really hurts you because some writers that I see quitting because they're impatient, I know they had it in them. I know they had what it took, except for the patience. So patience is a virtue. I know that it is really hard to be patient. I am a very impatient person myself, and I've really had to condition myself. And also, P.S., I have to keep reminding myself that I can't just expect things to work right away. And that's a horrible lesson to learn. I don't love it. It's a pain. It's the sad truth that it might take longer than you think. But of course, the people who tell me that they have invested so much time and so they can't quit even though they want to, that's kind of silly as well. People are like, oh my God, well, I've already invested so much. You've been learning. You've been enjoying yourself. You've created worlds. You have not wasted your time or any money you invested. You were learning. This is part of your journey. So even if you do decide to scrap your book, that is on you, but you never wasted time. You really didn't. Even if you didn't waste. Even if you spent weeks querying with your book, that was teaching you something, teaching you about selling something to someone, teaching you about describing something to someone. It's actually a whole business course that you've been taking, and you've got this. So what should you do if you are you've got this stagnant book project and you really wanted to quit, and I've actually convinced you not to? What are some of the things that you can do to make it feel new? You can take a break. Remember the break I mentioned. Taking a break can sometimes be exactly what you needed. A little distance can make a huge difference. A little distance gives you objectivity. You return with a clearer mind, renewed energy and enthusiasm, all of that. But I'm not talking about taking a break for so long that other things come in. And also, I'm not talking about taking a break for so long that you lose any momentum you had, because sometimes I feel that momentum is really one of the secret weapons for being a prolific author, and prolific is what it takes to have monetary success. So another thing you can do to make your project feel new is get inspired. Remind yourself what you loved about it, right? Look back at your inspiration. Look back at those vision boards. Take yourself on a creative date to the places that inspired your settings. That is a great way to launch yourself back into it. And also, when I talked about the authors who are like, oh, I'm going to start a new book project because this one wasn't working, they don't realize that the same stumbling blocks they had are going to plague their next project, right? So if you're coming back to the same project, I want you to identify those stumbling blocks, right? Look at what it is. Okay, where did I mess up with this character? Where did this plot line start to feel bad? How did I feel that my writing style was not really aligned with who I am? Identify those things, address them head on. They are not going to get better by themselves. And then do a little bit of experimenting. Choose a key scene, rewrite it from scratch. See if you can improve it. This shows you how much you've learned, how much you've progressed. You can also change things about your story. As I said, it's easier to change things than you would think. Alter the setting, change the name of a character and a few key characteristics, and then seek that feedback and see, what people think about it. But also, again, stop listening to too many people at this stage, because, you can be listening to everything and you're going to get completely scrambled and it's not going to work out. But definitely celebrate your achievements and, reassess everything. Take a look and say, okay, what's working, what's not. But be patient with yourself. I think that's really crucial because, again, burnout, not awesome. Writing demands creativity, time, energy. If burnout occurs, you're going to be exhausted and you're going to lose that motivation. And it's just not the best way to go, because that's when you end up scrapping your writing career entirely. Now, this is a whole other animal. I have some authors who've come to me and they're like, this is my last ditch effort. I'm coming to you as a writing coach because I don't know, should I keep writing or not? I kind of want to maybe start being a painter instead. And as a writing and creative coach, this is why I say I'm a writing and creative coach, because I think all human beings need to be creative. Not all human beings need to be writers. Those who want to be writers, I want to help you. But if you need to look at another aspect of your creativity, maybe, right? That could be the right thing. However, you also need to be crystal clear about that, because I see the same reasons for why people are thinking of scrapping writing in general. And I kind of warn them that whatever you do, those reasons come back to you. Just like those things that weren't working in your book, that often happens. So many authors, they're like, I'm going to quit because I didn't encounter success or recognition. So they didn't have the sales, they didn't have the acclaim, they didn't win that writing prize. And so they feel super discouraged. Yeah, that's not great. So if you know you need validation, you're going to have to look and see, how do I get that validation? That becomes one of your main goals, right? And if you're going into some other creative thing, well, you still are going to be seeking success or recognition, aren't you? Unless you're doing it just for the joy of it. So maybe you should look, okay, if you're thinking, I'm going to quit writing because I haven't encountered any success or recognition, and I'm going to become a painter, but I'm going to be doing it just for me and I don't care if I'm successful. Can you do that with writing? Or is painting what you really wanted to do? That's totally fine, right? When you get the rejection and the criticism, that is everywhere in life. We get that everywhere. Personal challenges, same thing, right? Health issues, family obligations, life events. Should you quit or should you scale back? Scaling back is kind of, that works a lot. So think about that. And also, as your priorities shift, yeah, sometimes you want to focus on something else. You have a baby, you're building a new career. Okay, that's fair enough. I'm not telling you you need to hold on to this writing thing as a matter of course, because sometimes the writing isn't feeding your life the way it used to right now. You don't need to tell everybody you've quit. Just take a step back. you'll show people by what you're doing that you've taken a step back for now, but at least you haven't come out and been like, I quit. I quit forever. That's very dramatic. And I know that sometimes it can feel good in this self-destructive way, but you definitely can just put it in your back pocket. Keep that plate, somewhat spinning a little bit. Keep your website up. Keep, an Instagram account up and post once in a while. You don't need to quit altogether, right? Sometimes the expectations are so unrealistic, and you think that, being a writer is going to take, much more time and energy that you have to give and everything else, but they're all different kinds of writers. There are the writers who are trying to be commercially successful, who are working at it in and out every day, but there are the writers who are just doing it because it's fun. Think about journaling. Think about, okay, if you still have this passion for writing, if that love for writing is still there, explore ways to kind of express that enthusiasm, maybe in ways that don't cost you as much right now. Or what about your goals and expectations? Are you working at a huge corporate career, but you also want to be a best-selling author? Okay, is that realistic, or does it need adjustment? Because, sometimes it's true, you can't do it all at once. Right? So definitely I would encourage you to explore other creative outlets. If nothing else, sometimes they can actually provide the break from routine and the new inspiration that might actually feed your writing. So I definitely tell you, pick up that paintbrush, pick up that instrument. And maybe that's going to create a whole new avenue of expression. Maybe you can integrate it into your writing, or maybe it's going to replace writing as a form of self-expression that gives you that great overall well-being that you're looking at. Do that. Look at it as self-care. But sometimes, just reassess everything. That's the important thing. Look at your finances, your time management, your mindset, everything else, and decide, okay, what is it that I really want? Because the last thing you want to do is be reactive. When you're reactive, you make silly decisions that are, and at the same time, decisions can be reversible. But let's say that you've taken down your website, you've shut down all your social media accounts, you've stopped writing, you've put your foot down, and then you're like, oh no, now I have to start everything over. In terms of time wasted, okay, again, I still don't think you've wasted your time, but you're now going to give yourself a whole lot of work or a huge hill to climb as you try to regain what you had worked so hard on. So try not to scrap too many things, and try to reuse or implement some of the things that you've worked so hard on. This is what leads us to the idea of book marketing and whether you're going to scrap a whole strategy or start something new or try again. I have had a huge struggle with social media, book promotions, building my author list for the emails and everything else, because our world is changing so much. The market conditions are constantly changing faster than ever now. And when it comes to the publishing industry, I feel like these changes are happening so much faster than they used to. And they are really, really impactful to all kinds of authors, whether you're self-published or conventionally published. And I've been looking even at some of the writing podcasts, some of the book critiquers, some of the book websites. Many of them have actually taken a step back because they're like, we're reevaluating the changing market conditions, and we're trying to find the best way to help you out as authors or as readers. And that's really significant. That tells you that there is something major afoot. I had an interesting discussion with an online company called Fable, which is an app that you might have seen. They've got online book clubs, and they're really looking at ways of, kind of helping both readers and writers. And they're having a time of it. They've been doing a lot of research to see how can they monetize, how can they sell books, how can they help authors to sell books. And let me tell you, it's not easy, right? It is not easy. You would think it's so easy to sell a book. It definitely isn't. There's so many different layers to a book marketing strategy that I can tell that so many times you're doing it and you're like, this is not working, when in reality, it's like it kind of is working, but maybe not as fast as you might think. So rather than scrapping your whole marketing campaign, things that I've really been tempting to do like a million times, this is why you probably shouldn't. But let's talk about some of the things that used to work that really now have been met with massively diminished effectiveness, these traditional methods, and so many authors still think that this is what they're supposed to be doing, and it kind of isn't. So they're going to feel bad that certain things that they've done are not functioning the way they thought, and they're like, oh, I need to scrap my whole campaign. And I think, no, it's not really scrapping the whole campaign. It's actually, let's start looking at some of the new ways of, being effective with your marketing. Now, keep in mind, it takes bombardment. It's hard to hear this, but it used to be that you could have an ad in, a magazine and everybody would see it. And people would be like, oh, I guess I better buy that book. It's in this magazine ad. Now people have so much more content that they're looking at that actually making your way into people's psyche and making them aware of you, that is something that takes way more work than it used to. So let's talk about some of these old methods though first, so that you don't try to make these things happen too much or don't focus on them too much. So for example, book signings and in-person events, these are kind of interesting because in-person events were once this huge staple, and apparently their effectiveness has diminished. So there are these challenges, there are online alternatives and everything else. But here's the thing. Many people say that that's the old way of doing things, but I do think there's something to be said for the one-on-one. And now many authors are like, oh, I've got so many ways of showing up online and I can hit so many more views and meet and, kind of impact so many more people by being online. But there's something about meeting somebody in person that actually leaves a more indelible impression. So I wouldn't totally scrap these in-person events, but I would think about them in a new way, make them a little bit novel, make them more interesting so that you kind of bring this feeling of novelty and engagement and community to it, but you're not kind of stuck thinking, I need to have a book signing in a bookstore and I can't do that because I'm not conventionally published, for example. There are other ways of creating things. I have a client who does a huge book launch party every time she launches a book, and she invites her friends and friends of friends, and she makes it really fun. And this kickoff is really effective for her in selling a lot of books in the early days of her book launch. I think that's awesome. In terms of advertisements, the traditional print media, that, used to work really well. But, there's been a change in readership habits, right? And people just kind of flip past that. The problem is all of this advertisement, we have so many avenues for it. And like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, they're all asking you to promote your stuff. And you do it, but people have ad blockers and people are skipping over things and everything else. And it's really hard to get people's attention. So I think that definitely having, some kind of advertisement is a must in a way, but you can't only be depending on that. So that's something to remember. And print media, probably not the best place to be because guess what? That's not where your readers hang out, right? If it was where your readers hang out, well, then you could do that. But I think, that's not going to work. Another way that people used to market books a lot is they do these huge email blasts, right? They do these email campaigns and everything else, just general. They'd have these email marketing companies that they just feed their stuff to, and then it'd be blasted out to this list. Now, that doesn't really work. People don't open their emails if they're not interested or engaged. So it's really resting on you to build an email list and provide content for your readers so that they're actually looking forward to reading your emails. If you're giving them something special where they're like, I'm getting some value out of this, they'll be looking forward to your emails, and you're going to be remembering to engage instead of sell, sell, sell. That seems to be what's moving the needle right now. So that's really important to continue doing. So if you've been sending these mass email blasts, you've been wasting your money and your time. The other thing is that authors, they'll build their website and they've got this basic static author website. They don't have any regular updates. It's just like, their picture and they've got, just very book listed and this and that. And, that doesn't work anymore. If you have that, it's time to go back to the drawing board. Don't ditch your whole website, But you might want to have more interactive features. You might want to have more content like a blog, multimedia, community engagement, tying all of that in. It's not only better for your website that is always, for SEO, that's what you need these days. If you have this basic website, you're not going to be getting any new visits. And anybody who comes to your website is going to be like, well, I don't need to go back because there won't be anything new. So you want to have an author website that provides all kind of stuff. For example, what I've been experimenting with is quizzes on my website, and people love them. And I try to create a new quiz, every other week. So it has people coming back. And each quiz gives me an opportunity to get more people signing up for my email list, right? To get the answers to the quiz, they have to give me their email address. So I'm getting, all of these things. And then I make sure that they prolong the experience with some really cool things coming into their inbox. So that's really important. Another thing that people were doing to try to, promote their book is they were looking for these social media influencers and these book reviews and everything else. And, it's gotten harder and harder to do this, but, it is still possible. But I think that doing things like author podcasts or doing things like, virtual book tours or even making, a book trailer or having a collaboration, all of these things might be fresher ways of getting more eyes on your stuff without you having to rely on these book reviewers, many of which are completely slammed and are charging a whole lot, by the way. So all of those things, you might start to see that things aren't as effective. But I think that before you scrap a whole marketing campaign, I think that you really need to be realistic about, have I really put in everything that I needed to put in? Have I done it enough? Right? Because many times we put out one ad and we're like, that ad didn't work. Well, my whole social media campaign is definitely a mess, or my whole Instagram profile isn't working. Sometimes it takes forever to start to see the needle moving on that audience engagement. Sometimes the algorithm needs to see more of your content before they start to realize what you're about. Sometimes you have to do little mini pivots to start to see a strategy that actually works, but give it enough time so that you're not switching, or quitting, not having given it the opportunity to actually function. That is so important. And in my course, From Idea to Published in 6 months, I help you to build an author platform that is multifaceted, that is modern, and that actually helps you to kind of hit from all angles without burning yourself out. And I think that's really crucial. And even if you get DIY author, that also is going to help you to see all the different possibilities. You're not going to have your hand held as much in the process, and you won't be able to speak to me about what's going on, but you're still going to get some really great tips and how-tos step by step on how to build a marketing platform and a marketing strategy that's going to work and that you don't need to scrap after a short time. So remember, marketing efforts, they build on themselves. And if you're not seeing results, tweak a little bit. Don't quit it and go back to the drawing board. Don't keep redoing your profile, or don't keep changing the look of your website or of your social media so that people don't know who you are, because it takes a while for people to realize who you are. It takes that familiarity. Sometimes it takes sticking to something for longer than you wanted to start getting the results that you actually wanted. So that said, I hope that this was a useful episode for you, that you kind of got a little bit more clear in your mind about quitting versus not quitting versus taking a break versus, sticking it out and seeing everything for what it is. Writing is something that should be feeding your life, and it shouldn't be impacting you in these negative ways. And if it is, that's a valid thing to be happening to you. I'm not going to guilt you and be like, oh my God, the writing's not working for you. You must not mean to be a writer. That's not true. Sometimes there's something that's not working. That's just a little thing that can be tweaked. And that's something we can talk about in office hours if you're in From Idea to Published in 6 months, or you can just give me a call. I can, line up a meeting with me, and you go onto my website and there's a link on Calendly. You can make an appointment to talk with me and see how to get unstuck and whether you should scrap it or transform it. But I don't think you should scrap it. Not necessarily. That's the smallest proportion of writers should actually quit. That's only because they weren't meant to be a writer. They did it for the wrong reasons. And I don't think that's you. if you're listening to this podcast. So thank you for being with me. I look forward to being with you next week on the How to Be an Author podcast. And if you have any questions or you want any more interesting subjects for me to talk about, please feel free to reach out at Karena@spalmorum.com. And you can find that email on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com or onlineCoursesForWriters.com. Thank you. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.